Somewhere between the pages of the Bible and the surname on your passport, there may be a thread nobody ever pointed out to you. Certain family names carried through medieval Spain, Portugal, Babylonia, and Eastern Europe weren't chosen at random. They were badges, honorary titles, and genealogical claims tying specific families back to King David himself, the shepherd king of ancient Israel. 10 of those surnames survive today, carried by millions of people who have no idea what they're holding. This is the investigation into where they came from and how they made it into the modern world. The tribe of David was, technically, the tribe of Judah. David was born into Judah, the fourth son of Jacob, and it was from this tribe that the line of Israelite and later Judean kings descended, starting with David around 1000 BCE and continuing through Solomon and dozens of successors until the fall of the kingdom of Judah to the Babylonians in 587 BCE. What happened after that fall is where this story gets interesting, because the Davidic line did not simply vanish into history. It went underground, and in Babylon it resurfaced as an actual institution, the Exilarchate. The Exilarch, in Hebrew Reish Galuta, head of the diaspora, was the highest civil authority recognized by Babylonian Jewry, and the families who held that office for centuries traced their ancestry in the male line directly to the House of David. This wasn't vague folklore. It was a formal, documented office, and the men who held it were proud of what genealogists call their genealogical purity, keeping records precisely because the claim to Davidic blood was their entire source of legitimacy. When the office of Exilarch eventually dissolved, descendants of these Exilarchs scattered across the Jewish world, carrying their lineage claims with them into Persia, into Spain, into North Africa, and eventually into Poland and the rest of Europe. Several of the surnames on this list trace back to that exact migration. The first name worth knowing is Shealtiel, sometimes spelled Saltiel, Zaltiel, Shartiel, Sealtiel, or Sietliel, depending on the country it landed in. According to Sephardic family tradition, the line traces back to Hezekiah of Baghdad, the last Exilarch, who died the same year the great medieval scholar Rashi was born. When Hezekiah's dynasty came under pressure in Babylon, his descendants fled westward, eventually settling in Granada, in southern Spain, where 2 sons named Yitzhak and David are said to have continued the family line. From that point, the Shealtiel name spread outward across the Mediterranean and eventually into Western Europe, morphing along the way into its various spellings. Genealogists researching the family in the 20th century found Shealtiels living in 25 different countries, many of whom had no idea the name carried any special weight until they were contacted. The story became well known enough that the BBC produced a documentary about it in the year 2000, titled Shealtiel, A Family Saga, following members of the family as they pieced together a lineage that stretched back nearly 3,000 years, at least according to the tradition they inherited. The second surname takes a stranger path because it started life not as a family name at all, but as an honorary title. Charlap, also spelled Charlap, Charlof, Harlaf, or Charlap, is a Hebrew acronym meaning roughly chief sage of the exile, and it was first used to honor a specific person, Chia al-Dawdi, born around 1080 in Spain, who became an advisor to a king, a military leader, and a scholar, and who was the first person in this branch of the family to migrate to Portugal. His father, according to family tradition, descended from Hezekiah of Baghdad, the same Exilarch who anchors the Shealtiel story, meaning both of these surnames may share the exact same root 2 branches down from the same Babylonian ancestor. Chia's descendants became known as the Ibn Yahya family, sometimes written Don Yahya or Don Yechia, a dynasty that came to hold vast landholdings across Portugal and Spain and produced generations of rabbis, scholars, and court officials. Centuries later, when the Alhambra decree and the Portuguese expulsions forced Iberian Jews to flee across the Mediterranean and into the Ottoman Empire. One branch of the Ibn Yahya family eventually settled in Poland. There, a rabbi decided to formally adopt the old honorary title as his surname, reviving the name Charlap 500 years after Chia al-Dawdi had earned it. When Napoleon later required all Jews in his territories to register permanent surnames in the early 1800s, most of that Polish family kept Charlap, though at least one relative, a dairyman, registered instead as Sir, the Polish word for cheese, which is why some of his direct descendants today carry a surname referring to dairy products rather than to Babylonian nobility, despite belonging to the exact same family tree. Move from Eastern Europe back toward the Middle East, and you find the third name, Dayan, one of the most extensively documented Davidic surnames in existence, concentrated historically among Syrian Jews from the city of Aleppo. What makes the Dayan claim unusual is the sheer weight of paperwork behind it. Genealogists have cross-referenced two independent lists tracing the family's lineage. One compiled from documents found in the Cairo Geniza, a storeroom of over 300,000 Jewish manuscripts discovered in Cairo in the late 1800s, and another compiled separately hundreds of years later, and found the two lists nearly identical. Using this documentation, one member of the family, Mitchell Dayan, was able to verify a direct father-to-son lineage stretching back 87 generations to King David. Another relative, Rabbi Yosef Dayan, discovered his own family's connection almost by accident. After burying his grandfather in Jerusalem in the late 1960s, he noticed the headstone was inscribed with the words, "From the House of David," a phrase his family had apparently used as a private tradition for generations without much fanfare. He later received an antique genealogical document from a cousin placing him as the 89th generation from King David, a document that was examined and endorsed by Israel's former Sephardi chief rabbi. Beyond the Dayan name itself, genealogists working with this Aleppo community have identified several other family names that branch directly off the same tree, including Sema, Sheo, Sit, Sultan, Mansur, and Hadiah, meaning if any of these surnames appear in your family history alongside Syrian Jewish roots, you may be looking at the same Davidic branch under a different name. One unexpected descendant frequently cited in this lineage through his mother's Syrian Jewish family is the comedian Jerry Seinfeld. The fourth surname moves the story to the Iberian Peninsula and one of the most famous Jewish families in European history, Abravanel, also spelled Abarbanel, Abrabanel, Avravanel, or in some later branches, Barbanel and Barbernel. The family's most celebrated member, Isaac Abravanel, born in Lisbon in 1437, was explicit about the claim in his own writing, stating plainly that his family descended from King David and tracing that descent to two groups of Davidic exiles who had migrated to Spain after the Romans destroyed the Second Temple in the year 70. One group, he wrote, settled in the town of Lucena and represented what he called the direct sons of David, while the other settled in Seville, and it was from this second branch that his own family descended. Isaac Abravanel wasn't a minor figure. He served as treasurer and finance minister to the kings of Portugal, and later to Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, and after the 1492 expulsion of Spanish Jews, he became a major biblical commentator, whose work was studied by Christian and Jewish scholars alike for centuries. His family reinforced their claimed pedigree by signing official documents with the Hebrew phrase meaning, "From the stem of David, King of Israel," a habit that continued across generations and multiple countries. Descendants of this family eventually spread as far as Brazil. The well-known Brazilian television personality Silvio Santos, whose birth name was Senhor Abravanel, belonged to this same lineage, as does his daughter Patricia Abravanel and grandson Tiago Abravanel. Fifth on the list is a name already mentioned in passing but worth its own attention, Ibn Yahya, or Don Yahya, the Portuguese-Spanish dynasty founded by Chia al-Dawdi that later gave rise to the Charlap surname. Before the family split into its Polish branch, the Ibn Yahya name itself was carried by generations of scholars, military commanders, and court officials across Portugal and Aragon, including one member who built a synagogue in the Spanish town of Calatayud, and another appointed bailiff by King Alfonso II of Aragon. When the expulsions from Spain and Portugal scattered the family across the Mediterranean basin and into the Ottoman Empire, branches of the Ibn Yahya name survived independently in Italy, Greece, and North Africa, meaning the surname persisted in its original form in some regions, even as it transformed into Charlap in others. The sixth surname takes the story to Morocco. Berduga, a family based historically in the city of Meknes, which according to its own paternal tradition descends from Bostanai, a 7th century Babylonian exilarch widely regarded by Jewish historians as one of the last men to hold that Davidic office in its classical form, before the position was gradually absorbed by rival family branches. Bostanai's descendants are credited in several other family traditions as well, but the Berduga family's claim is specifically noted among genealogists cataloging Sephardic and North African Jewish lineages, tracing back to the exilarchate. The seventh name, Meisels, moves the story north into Poland. The patriarch of this family, Yitzchak Isaac Meisels, is recorded in family genealogies as an alleged 10th-generation descendant of the exilarch Mar Ukba, another Babylonian officeholder from the Davidic line, predating Bostanai by several centuries. What makes the Meisels case notable is how it illustrates a broader pattern seen throughout this list. A Davidic claim, once established, tends to attach itself not just to one surname, but to an entire cluster of related families who intermarry, relocate, and take on new names over the generations while quietly preserving the same underlying tradition. The eighth entry isn't a single surname, but a title that eventually became one. Nasi, the Hebrew word for prince, used historically as the formal title for the exilarchs of Babylon, and later revived in medieval southern France for a genuinely startling episode in Jewish history, the so-called Jewish princedom of Narbonne. According to a 12th century account by the historian Abraham ibn Daud, the Frankish king Charlemagne, or according to some sources his father Pepin the Short, requested that the Caliph of Baghdad send a Jewish scholar of the seed of royalty of the House of David to help govern Narbonne after its capture from Muslim rule in the year 759. The man sent was Rabbi Makir, and his descendants held the title of Nasi in Narbonne for generations, intermarrying with local nobility and, according to some accounts, briefly holding formal recognition as a kind of prince over the Jewish community, referred to in period documents as Rex Judaeorum, King of the Jews. One of Makir's descendants, Kalonymus ben Todros, used a seal in the late 1200s bearing a crowned lion of Judah, a heraldic symbol historians have linked directly to the claim of Davidic bloodline, since the lion was the emblem associated with the tribe of Judah in Jewish tradition. It's worth being honest about the uncertainty here. Modern historians, including the scholar who wrote the most detailed English-language study of Narbonne's Jewish princedom, note that no independent sources survive to confirm the story's earliest chapters, and the connection between the legendary founder and the documented Kalonymus family several centuries later cannot be verified with certainty. What can be verified is that the Nasi title, and the belief that it marked descent from David, persisted in southern France for over 500 years, and that families descended from this circle carried surnames like Kalonymus, Todros, and later Narboni into the modern era, some of which are still found today among Sephardic communities in North Africa and beyond. The ninth entry returns to Spain with the Rapoport surname, one of the most widespread rabbinic family names in Jewish history. First recorded around 1550 in Venetian and Polish Jewish community records. The name itself is a compound of the Hebrew word Rapha, meaning healer or doctor, and the Italian city named Porto, indicating a physician originally from the port city of Porto, meaning the surname's literal meaning has nothing to do with David at all. What connects some branches of this family to Davidic tradition instead is heraldic. Certain Rappaport coats of arms recorded in genealogical archives include a Star of David alongside a menorah and palm branches, a detail sometimes cited, though not conclusively proven, as a family assertion of descent from the royal line. Given how widespread and diverse the Rappaport name became across Galicia and Italy, this connection should be treated as a documented family tradition carried by specific branches rather than a claim applying to everyone who shares the surname today. The 10th and final entry is the most literal of all. Surnames built directly from the name David itself. David, Davidson, Dawid, Dawidowicz, Ben David, and their many regional variants. Unlike the previous 9 names, these patronymic surnames don't require a documented chain of exilarchs or medieval princes to explain their origin. They emerged the simplest way surnames ever do, as a marker meaning son of David, and were adopted independently over centuries by countless unrelated families across Europe and the Middle East, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, most of them honoring an ancestor named David, rather than claiming lineage from the biblical king. It's the surname most likely to appear on a family tree, and also, statistically, the least likely to represent an actual unbroken bloodline back to the throne of ancient Israel. Genealogists studying Davidic claims generally treat direct David surnames with more caution than the other 9 names on this list, precisely because the name David was simply too common a personal name throughout Jewish and Christian history for the surname alone to serve as reliable evidence of royal descent. Taken together, these 10 names sketch out a 2-part story. On one side sits a small number of families: Sheltiel, Sharlap, Dayan, Abravanel, Ibn Yahya, Berduga, Maisels, and the Narbonne and Nasi lineage, who carried formal, often written genealogical traditions across continents and centuries specifically because their claim to Davidic blood mattered enough to protect and record. On the other side sits a much larger population carrying names like Davidson or Rappaport, where the connection ranges from a documented family tradition in a specific branch to nothing more than a shared personal name with no genealogical weight behind it at all. None of these traditions can be verified with the certainty of a modern DNA test, since the genealogical record for anyone claiming descent from a figure who lived 3,000 years ago inevitably runs through gaps, legends, and centuries where record-keeping simply didn't survive. What can be said with confidence is that these specific families believed the claim enough to preserve it, generation after generation, often at real risk during periods of expulsion and persecution, when protecting a name meant protecting an entire inherited identity. Whether or not the bloodline holds up to modern scrutiny, the paper trail itself, the exilarch registries, the Cairo Geniza documents, the medieval seals, the headstones inscribed in Aleppo and Jerusalem, is real. And it's still sitting in archives today, waiting for anyone who happens to share one of these 10 names to go looking.